Kate, thanks for sitting down with me today. I appreciate your time.
That's okay, my pleasure.
Kate, I can imagine the olden days of plant breeding with apples took a very long time. Plant breeding with apples still takes a very long time. What kind of technology, what kind of advancements have we been able to accept and create to fast forward that process?
It certainly still takes a long time. It is inevitably, when you work with a tree, you have to wait for it to fruit, whatever you do to it. So when you're trying to do long-term assessments of material, elite advanced material, it takes time. But we can and have improved efficiencies, which I think have kind of shortened the amount of time that's required in breeding, primarily using tools like DNA-based tools, molecular markers, that enable us to be more efficient in the crosses that we're making, because we can understand a little bit more about the background parental material that we're using. And then also we're using similar sort of techniques to screen seedlings, which is I think, because it just adds to the confidence that we have about some of the material that we're looking at. It will enable us to just move things forward a little bit faster and potentially just cut off a year or two here and there in terms of making decisions and on to release.
A year or two can make a big difference.
Right.
A very big difference in commercializing any variety.
Yes.
Right. So apples, again, I will reiterate, I get very clearly, are very different than corn and soybeans.
Yes.
How have, and in your work here at WSU, how have local apple growers adopted or accepted the new Arctic varieties? Now, just to make sure we're clear, I'm asking you a little bit of a fireball question here, because this is now our genetically modified apple varieties.
Right.
Non-browning varieties.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. As far as I'm aware, there are certainly at least one grower in Washington who is growing Arctic apples. The general feeling has been a pushback, as you've commented. Certainly, because apple is it's a fresh product. It always has these. It sort of pulls the consumer in many ways. There's the sort of the healthy, fresh fruit. Yeah, absolutely, apple a day. But also, there's the whole deal about people have a very strong connection to apple varieties that they ate when they were a child. You talk to anybody in the East Coast, they love Macintosh. People kind of hark back to their youth when it comes to apples. So there's a very strong kind of heritage deal, and I think that's part of the pushback. When it comes to ultimately what you're seeing is is messing with our heritage, but as a technique, it's a fantastic technique, and as a plant breeder, then well, hey, gene silencing is a great way forward for us to be able to manipulate and to expand options in terms of the fruit that we're looking at and the ultimate product. So, as a plant breeder, I think it's great technology and could certainly open the door for a lot more change. As
a scientist, adding tools to the mix is always a positive thing.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah, and there certainly have been elements of the whole approach that are really very appealing.
Right, right, I'm sure.
But also the other side of working like that in Apple is, I think some of the pushback has been that if you're going to start and release what is effectively a GM apple, what trait should it have been? And I think, generally that there's been a bit of pushback about, is the non-browning an important enough trait to be pushing the whole concept out to the consumer first?
Speaking of characteristics, what characteristics are you folks looking at within your breeding programs to be enhanced from traditional breeding techniques?
I guess my program is a little bit different to the other apple breeding programs around the world, really, because here in Washington we have very different weather conditions. We have such low humidity that we don't have the same sort of disease pressures as most of the major apple growing areas around the world. And so because of that, it's really nice. I can focus on fruit quality attributes, which obviously are important for every breeding program, but I don't have to take quite the same line in terms of developing resistance. So my predominant selection characteristics are fruit quality. I mean, texture is a huge element of eating an apple, not just firmness but the crispness. And I think the other big target for my program is storability. Washington produces this massive crop. Our growers want to be able to sell fruit for 12 months of the year. They want to be able to sell good quality fruit for 12 months of the year. And so can I breed and select an apple that will be a really great eating experience in July, June, July, as it was in September, October off the tree.
Is your research focused solely on the fruit, or are you focused on the tree and the root system and what's going on underground?
Sure. I really am predominantly focused on the science. So because the tree is a composite tree, there is actually in the US an apple rootstock breeding program, and in fact Gennaro Fazio, who's the breeder based over in Geneva, New York, USDA breeder, he's here at the conference. So his focus is new rootstocks. So in terms of apple, my focus is all scion, all the tree above the ground. But I have also just started a program on pear rootstock. So I have an interest on the underground bit, but different crop.
Right. Okay. Since being here at the NAPB meeting here at WSU, one of the things that keeps coming up is beyond the plant breeding aspect for plant breeders, the science, is communication.
Right.
And how important communication and outreach is. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the important pieces for plant breeders and maybe the seed industry and the entire industry altogether? What things do we need to be thinking about as we move forward about skill sets for young people and steps that we can take to enhance that the perspective or the reputation of plant breeding?
Yeah, I mean that's a really important point. I think it's not just an issue in plant breeding, it's an issue typically in science across the board, is that trying to get a good communicator as well as a good scientist, the two don't always go hand in hand. And so, I think what we need to do is to make sure that we really push the communication experience for our students. They get good training, they have a lot of opportunity, they get good critique on any talks, any poster, any presentation, any pieces of work. How do you summarize the work that you're doing in 1 minute, which is something that we're making our graduate students do right now in this conference. It's a really difficult thing to do, and just sitting here listening to some of the experiences that we're getting, there is a big difference in ability. But I think also it's trying to focus, how do we get plant breeding summarized out to the general public, to the seed industry, to growers, whatever, in a clear, succinct way. What do people understand by plant breeding? And there's a huge amount of confusion, particularly when you start to overlay it with genetic modification. What is genetic modification? What is plant breeding? Even though my program is a fundamentally a conventional breeding program, I'm still, every time I give a new variety out to somebody to taste, the first response almost always is, oh, is this a GM apple? So I think it's really, we have to work very hard to try and get over the message of what actually is plant breeding, and it's such an important thing in terms of developing food for the nation and the world. It's so often overlooked, but we have in the NAPB, there's an education committee, a communication committee, and these two committees are working very hard to try and develop those sorts of tools. You know, that clear message in the education way for us to develop and educate new plant breeders, but also to educate the general public.
The story is there, the passion is there, the people are there. Now it's just a matter of actually portraying it to the world so that they can understand.
Sure, yes.
It's not like we have to make something up.
No.
It's all there.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And you know, you just have to sort of listen to some of the presentations that we've had today, where you see how plant breeding has overcome some huge issues in many, many different industries. You know, what we've heard is a real wide, diverse group of crops that have been represented here, and you know, those basic plant breeding skills have enabled those industries to keep going and to maintain profit.
Agreed. If we look into the future, I'm going to give you a big timeline, 5-year, 10-year. What do we see coming down the pipe for apples? What can we expect?
Well, I would just say 5 years and 10 years isn't such a big timeline for apples.
Great. Fair enough, yes.
Yeah, you know, I've been at WSU now for 7 years, and in that time it's moved on, the program's moved on a huge amount. We've released 3 apples, we've now got routine use of molecular DNA-based tools in the breeding program. I see certainly in the next 5 years we'll be having more of these tools developed that are linked to real key traits in fruit quality. We can apply more, which means we'll be able to improve the efficiency again, focus more in terms of targets, and then, you know, that's going to feed out into the next 10 years as well. So 10 years down the line, it would be great to say that we'll have a real good portfolio of a better quality apples that have come out from Washington.
You and your team have done an amazing job of hosting us here at Washington State University. You're surrounded by some of the most gorgeous countryside that I've come across. Your team has created a great platform for this information to be shared with. What's one thing that you take out of, because everyone should have to coordinate a meeting like this once in their life, what's one thing you take away from this process?
Oh, I think my my one thing would be just to really get a good grip on what exactly the meeting focus is at an really early stage, because so many things can just kind of be thrown in to totally mess up your plans if you've not really understood how the meeting should work, and what those aims are.
Okay. Have your end result in mind and then build it backwards.
Absolutely,
yeah,
yes.
Well, it shows here because this has been an amazing event so far.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for sitting down with me.
Okay.